Last summer, I was getting ready for the school party at my friend Sofia's house. About 40 people from our high school were going to be there, and I was really nervous because my ex would be there with his new girlfriend. A week before, Sofia had given me a joke bikini for my birthday. It was a tiny neon green thong that barely covered anything. The top part was basically 2 triangles, and the bottom part was like dental floss. Sofia had found it in an online store and thought it would be fun. When I tried it on, I was surprised at how good it looked on me. Much better than my usual black one-piece swimsuit. Although it was clearly a joke, the size was perfect. On the day of the party, I put on my green bikini under a sarong and drove to Sofia's house. When I arrived, the party was already in full swing. The music was loud, people were jumping in the pool, and you could smell the barbecue from the backyard. I found Sofia by the snack table and she almost choked on her drink when she saw me. "Oh my God, you really put it on," she said, laughing. I told her I wanted to try something different. When I took off my sarong, I felt like the whole world stopped. The neon green bikini sparkled under the party lights, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. It was a strange but addictive feeling. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I walked to the edge of the pool with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. Every step was calculated, every movement purposeful. I could hear the whispers around me and see the conversation stop. And in the middle of it all, I felt that familiar gaze burning into me. Diego was on the other side of the pool with Carmen hanging onto his arm, but his eyes were fixed on me. His mouth was slightly open, and I could see he'd completely forgotten about his girlfriend beside him. I smiled to myself and dove headfirst into the pool. The water was warm and perfect, and when I surfaced, shaking out my wet hair, I heard whistles and shouts of approval. My hair was plastered to my back, water dripped down my body, and my bikini was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. "Who's that?" I heard someone ask. "She's Diego's ex," another replied. "Seriously, he's crazy for letting that go." I pretended not to hear, but every word was like honey to my ears. I swam to the edge of the pool and slowly got out, letting the water trickle down my body. I grabbed a towel from one of the chairs and started drying myself, still pretending I hadn't noticed Diego watching me. Marcos, a guy from the basketball team who had always been nice to me, appeared out of nowhere with 2 drinks in his hands. "I brought you these," he said, handing me a glass with a beautiful smile. "Thank you, Marcos, you're an angel," I replied, lightly touching his arm. The drink was sweet and refreshing, and I sipped it slowly, savoring each bite. Marco started talking to me about the party, about how beautiful I looked, about how he'd never seen me like this before, and I responded with smiles and laughter, feeling more and more confident. That's when I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Their cologne, that same cologne I used to love, reached me before I even spoke. "Hi," Diego said, appearing beside me. "Hi," I replied without taking my eyes off Marcos. "How are you?" he asked, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I'm great, thanks," I replied curtly, finally turning to face him. His eyes scanned my body before meeting mine. "Do you look different?" he asked. "Different how?" I asked, tilting my head to the side. "You know how," he said, his voice a little lower. Marcos was standing next to me, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I'll get more drinks," he said. "Would you like anything else?" "Yes, I would," I replied, giving him a huge smile. "Anything sweet?" He smiled back and walked away. Diego stood there, clearly irritated by the interruption. "New boyfriend?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Why do you want to know?" I replied, "Just curious." "Ah, I see, the same curiosity you had when you cheated on me with Carmen." Diego swallowed hard. "I never cheated on you. Of course I did, maybe it wasn't physical, but you were already thinking about her long before you broke up with me." She didn't reply because she knew it was true. Instead, she kept looking at me with that look I knew so well, the look she had when she wanted something. "You look amazing," she finally said. "Thanks," I replied, not giving it much thought. "Seriously, that bikini. You never wore anything like that with me, maybe because you never gave me a reason to feel beautiful enough to wear it." The line came out harsher than I expected, and I saw it hit the mark. Diego was speechless for a moment. "I always thought you were beautiful," she said. "No, Diego. You thought you were confident. There's a difference." Marcos came back with my drink, and I thanked him with a kiss on the cheek. I saw Diego's face darken when I did that. "Thank you, you're a sweetheart," I said to Marcos, running my hand along his arm. "You're welcome," Marcos replied, clearly pleased with the attention. Diego stood there watching our interaction with an increasingly irritated expression. It was exactly the reaction I wanted. "Come on, let's dance," I said to Marcos, taking his hand. "Sure," he replied, following me. As we walked away, I could feel Diego's eyes on me, and for the first time in months, I felt in control. The music was loud and infectious, and I started dancing in a way I'd never danced before. My hips swayed to the music, my arms were raised above my head, and I could feel every man's eyes on me. It was an intoxicating feeling. Marcos danced with me, clearly impressed with this new version of me. His hands sometimes touched my waist, and I let them. Sometimes our bodies drew closer during the dance, and I didn't pull away. All this while Diego watched from afar with an increasingly desperate expression. Other boys started approaching, wanting to dance with me too. Esteban, who was on the football team, Alejandro, who was one of the most popular boys in school, and even the substitute PE teacher who shouldn't have been there, but whom Sofia had invited because she thought he was cute. I danced with everyone, laughed with everyone, flirted with everyone, and Diego just stood there, watching it all with a mixture of desire and anger I'd never seen in him before. At one point, when the music slowed down, Marcos pulled me toward him and we started dancing close. His hands were on my waist and I could feel the heat of his body against mine. It was pleasant, it was exciting, and it was exactly what I needed to forget Diego, but I still couldn't stop glancing toward the corner where he was, and every time our eyes met, I could see he was dying of jealousy. It was better than any revenge I could have planned. The night was barely beginning, and I already knew it would be unforgettable, not just for me, but especially for Diego. He was going to regret leaving me forever, and I was going to make sure of it. The party was getting livelier and livelier, and I felt like the star of a movie. Every move I made was watched. Every laugh I made echoed through the house, and I loved this feeling of being the center of attention. Diego couldn't stay still. He kept wandering around the party, always finding an excuse to be near me. He'd go get drinks from the table by the pool, greet friends in my group. He'd do anything to justify being near me. Carmen was clearly irritated. She tried to start conversations with him, held his arm, kissed him on the cheek, but Diego was clearly oblivious. Her eyes kept returning to me, and it was driving her crazy. "Diego, are you listening to me?" I heard her ask, raising her voice. "Of course I am," she replied, but without taking her eyes off me. I was sitting on the edge of the pool with my feet in the water, talking to a group of guys who had gathered around me. Marcos was to my right, Esteban to my left, and 3 more were in front of me, all clearly interested in me. "Have you always been like this?" asked Alejandro, who was squatting in front of me. "Like what?" I asked, tilting my head. "Like this, free, confident, sexy." I laughed softly. "I've always been like this. It's just that some people didn't know how to recognize it." "Lucky for us then," Esteban said, and everyone laughed. I could feel Diego approaching. He was trying to be discreet, but it was obvious he was coming our way. I decided to escalate the situation. "Do you want to see something?" I asked the group with a mischievous smile. "Sure," they replied in unison. I got up and went over to the speaker. I changed the music to something more sensual and went back near the pool. I started dancing alone, moving my body provocatively, feeling the music coursing through my veins. The guys around me were mesmerized. Some started recording with their phones. Others just stared, mouths agape. I felt like a goddess, powerful and irresistible. That's when I felt a hand on my arm. I turned around and saw Diego with a serious expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. "I'm busy," I replied, continuing to dance. "Please," she insisted. "Say it here," I said, stopping my dancing but staying with the group. Diego looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. Alone? He said. No, I replied firmly. Okay, here, say what you have to say. He swallowed hard. I think I made a mistake. What kind of mistake? I asked, playing dumb. Breaking up with you. An awkward silence settled around us. The guys with me exchanged glances, and I could feel they were all paying attention to our conversation. Oh yeah, I asked, crossing my arms. Yeah, you're amazing, different, sexy. I've never seen you like this. How funny, I said, smiling coldly. I haven't changed at all. I've always been like this. You were just too blind to notice. So why were you never like this with me? He asked, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. Because you didn't deserve it. I replied without hesitation. The response caught him off guard. He stood there processing what she had said. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. I continued, saying I was boring, conservative, and bland. You destroyed my self-esteem and then dumped me because I wasn't interesting enough. I never said that. He tried to defend himself. You didn't need to say it. Your actions spoke for you. The guys around me were watching everything like it was a movie. Some seemed impressed with how I was handling the situation. But now you're being yourself, Diego said. Exactly. And you know why? Because you're not here anymore to make me feel small. At that moment, Carmen appeared, furious. Seriously, Diego? Are you going to stand there humiliating yourself and me for her? Diego didn't even look at Carmen. His eyes were fixed on me. You're right, Marcos said, getting up. You missed your chance, brother. Nobody asked you, Diego replied irritably. You don't need to ask. Marcos responded, positioning himself protectively in front of me. Anyone with eyes can see you didn't know what you had. And now it's not yours anymore, Esteban added, positioning himself on my other side. Diego looked around and saw that I was surrounded by guys who were clearly on my side. The situation was getting tense. Let's go, Diego, Carmen said, pulling him by the arm. Are you making a fool of yourself? No, Diego said, pulling away. I'm not leaving. Then I'll leave, Carmen replied. You choose. Either you come with me now, or it's over between us. Diego looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at her again. I could see her inner conflict, the struggle between pride and desire. I'm staying, she finally said. Carmen was in shock. You can't be serious. I am serious, Diego confirmed without taking his eyes off me. Then that's it, Carmen shouted. You're pathetic, Diego, chasing after an ex who clearly doesn't love you. She stormed off, and I could hear her cursing as she walked away. Diego stood there as if he'd just realized what he'd done. I hope it was worth it, I said, turning around and going back to my group of admirers. But deep down, I knew I just won the first battle. Diego had chosen to stay for me. He'd lost his girlfriend for me, and the night was just getting started. What a show, Marcos whispered in my ear. It's not over yet, I replied, smiling. And he was right, the best was yet to come. With Carmen out of the picture, Diego was completely uninhibited. He no longer knew what to do with himself, wandering around the party like a ghost, always trying to get closer to me, but without the courage to get too close after what had happened. I, on the other hand, was having more fun than ever, without the pressure of having to compete with Carmen. I could focus on enjoying the night and making Diego regret his decision even more. The party was in full swing. The music was loud. People were excited, and I was at the center of it all. I decided it was time to up the ante. Do you want to play truth or dare? I asked the group around me. Sure, they replied in unison. We sat in a circle near the pool. There were about 10 of us. Me, Marcos, Esteban, Alejandro, some other boys, and some girls who had joined the group. Diego was a few feet away, pretending to talk to other friends, but I knew he was watching everything. I'll start, I said, grabbing an empty bottle lying on the ground. Truth or dare? I asked Marcos when the bottle stopped on him. Dare, he replied without hesitation. I dare you to kiss me? I said, surprising everyone. Marcos didn't need to be convinced twice. He leaned in and kissed me. It was a good kiss, full of desire, and I gave myself to him completely. When we broke apart, I heard some whistling and applause. "Wow," Esteban said. "What a way to start." I glanced discreetly in Diego's direction and saw that his fists were clenched, his jaw tight. He was clearly furious. The game continued, and the tasks became increasingly daring. I kissed 2 more boys, danced seductively with one of the girls, and even took a dive in a bikini that didn't cover much anyway. Diego was getting more and more agitated. I was drinking more than usual, talking louder, and I could see I was at my limit. That's when the bottle stopped on me again. "Truth or dare?" asked Sofia, who had joined the group. "Dare," I replied without hesitation. Sofia smiled mischievously. "I dare you to swim naked?" The whole group fell silent. It was a daring challenge, even by the party's standards. "Really?" I asked, laughing. "Really?" Sofia confirmed. "But only if you want to, of course." I looked around. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my answer. I glanced over at Diego and saw he was practically drooling, waiting to see what I was going to do. "Okay," I said, getting up. "But you can't record, we promise," Marco said. I moved a little way away from the group toward the darker part of the pool. I slowly untied the top of my bikini and threw it on the floor. Then I took off the bottoms too. The silence was absolute. Even the music seemed to have quieted down. I was completely naked in front of everyone. And for the first time in my life, I felt no shame. I felt powerful. I dove into the pool and swam to the other side. When I surfaced, tossing my hair, I heard a burst of cheers and applause. I slowly climbed out of the water, grabbing a towel that was on a nearby chair. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "That was incredible," said another. Diego stood a few feet away, completely mesmerized. His eyes traveled over my body, even with the towel on, and I could see he was totally lost in it. "Satisfied?" I asked the group, smiling. "More than satisfied," Esteban replied. I went back to the circle and put my bikini back on, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Everyone was looking at me differently, now more respectfully, more admiringly. "Your turn," I said to Sofia, spinning the bottle. But before I could do anything, Diego appeared out of nowhere. "We need to talk," he said, pulling me by the arm. "Hey, brother," Marco said, getting up. "Leave her alone." "This is none of your business," Diego replied. "Fine," I said, raising my hand. "I'll talk to him." I walked away from the group with Diego, who was clearly agitated. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked as soon as we were alone. "Having fun," I replied calmly. "That wasn't fun. That was exhibitionism." "So what's the problem?" "The problem is you're not like that." "How do you know who I am? Do you really know me?" Diego ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You never did anything like this with me. You were never so free." "Because you didn't deserve it," I replied without hesitation. "Which side?" "The side of." The phrase slipped out of her mouth before I could stop her. As soon as she said it, I saw that she immediately regretted it. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean it that way, but it was already—" "Oh, so now I'm one for feeling free, for having fun, for doing what I want with my body." "No, that's not it. That's exactly it. You can't accept that I'm happy without you, that I'm confident without you, that I'm sexy without you." Diego was speechless. "Do you know what your problem is, Diego? You want a submissive girlfriend who depends on you, who hides behind you. But when she discovers you can be more, you can't handle it." "Yes, I can handle it," she said desperately. "You can't. And you know how I know that? Because you just called me out for doing exactly what you always wanted me to do." Diego tried to touch me, but I pushed him away. "No," I said firmly. "You forfeited the right to touch me. You forfeited the right to have any opinion about what I do." "I still love you," she said, and for the first time that night, her voice sounded vulnerable. I didn't answer. "You love the idea of possessing me, but I'm not your property. I never was." I went back to the group, leaving Diego alone. When I sat back down in the circle, everyone looked at me with admiration. "Everything all right?" Marcos asked. Perfect, I replied, smiling. And it was true. I felt perfect, free, powerful. And Diego could cry in his corner because it wasn't my problem anymore. The rest of the night was a succession of moments I knew I would remember forever. After my argument with Diego, it was as if something inside me had been released. I was completely uninhibited, doing things I never would have had the courage to do before. Diego continued to hang around the party, but now with a different demeanor. He was no longer irritated or possessive. He was defeated. I could see in his eyes that he understood he had completely lost any chance with me. "Are you okay?" Sofia asked, coming closer to me. "I've never been better," I replied. And it was true. "That dive was epic," he said, laughing. "You became a legend today." "Well, you challenged me. I didn't think you would." "Me neither," I admitted. "But it was liberating." We both laughed, and I felt like I'd crossed an invisible line. The insecure girl who had arrived at the party a few hours earlier was gone. In her place was a confident woman who knew exactly what she wanted. "You know what?" Sofia said. "That bikini was the best gift I ever gave you." "I completely agree." The party began to wind down around 2 in the morning. Some people had already left. Others were starting to say their goodbyes. I was sitting in an armchair near the pool, talking to Marcos, when Diego approached again. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. But this time his voice was different. There was no more arrogance or possessiveness, only sadness. I looked at Marcos, who understood the message, and discreetly walked away. "What do you want, Diego?" I asked wearily. He sat down on the edge of the pool facing me. "I want to apologize." "Why? For calling me?" "For everything," she said, running her hands over her face. "For making you feel like you weren't enough. For leaving you. For being an idiot." I didn't reply. I just waited for him to continue. "I see now that you were always amazing. I was just too blind to notice." "Diego," I interrupted him. "Let me finish. I lost the most incredible woman I've ever known because I was a coward. Because I couldn't deal with the fact that you were better than me." "You didn't lose," I said calmly. "You chose to throw it all away." "I know, and I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life." We were silent for a moment. I could hear the music playing softly in the background. The sound of people talking. The sound of the pool water. "I don't want you to regret it," I finally said. "I want you to be happy." "How can I be happy knowing I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me?" "By learning from my mistakes," I replied. "And treat the next girl better than you treated me." Diego looked at me with teary eyes. "There won't be a next girl. Not like you." "Yes, there will be one," I said, lightly touching her hand. "It will happen. And when it does, you'll remember this night and you'll treat her the way she deserves to be treated." "I still love you." He said it again. "I know," I replied. "But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes we hurt the people we love so much that there's no going back." Diego lowered his head in defeat. "You're right. I forgive you," I said, surprising myself. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." She looked at me in surprise. "Thank you, but that doesn't change anything." I continued. "We're never going back." "I know," he said, his voice almost a whisper. He stood up and stood in front of me for a moment. "I hope you're very happy," he said. "You deserve it." "I know I deserve it," I replied with a smile. Diego walked away, and I knew it was the last time we'd have a conversation like this. I had finally understood that I had lost any chance with him, and I had finally freed myself completely from him. Marcos came back and sat next to me. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I replied, leaning back against him. "Do you want me to take you home?" he asked. "In a little while," I replied. "I want to enjoy this a bit longer." We stayed there, watching the stars reflected in the pool. I felt whole, fulfilled, as if I had finally found who I really was. "You know," I said to Marcos, "I think this was the best night of my life." "Why?" she asked. "Because it was the first night I was completely myself." Marcos smiled and pulled me closer. "Here's to more nights like this." "That's why I agree." And deep down I knew that night had changed everything. Not only in my relationship with Diego, but in my relationship with myself. I had discovered a version of myself I didn't know existed. A confident, sexy, powerful version of herself. She would never again be the insecure girl she had been before. The following week, the whole school was talking about the party. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked through the hallways. I heard the whispers as I entered the room. I noticed the conversations stopping as I approached. But this time it was different. They weren't looks of pity or whispers of disdain. They were looks of admiration, whispers of envy, conversations about how I'd changed. "You've become a legend," Sophia said, approaching my locker Monday morning. "That's an exaggeration," I replied, laughing. "It's not an exaggeration. Everyone's talking about you, about how you killed it at the party. And Diego is devastated. She hasn't spoken to anyone since Saturday. And Carmen, well, she's spreading the word that you're desperate." "Let her talk," I said, shrugging. "The opinions of people who don't know me don't affect me." "You've really changed," Sophia said, looking at me intently. "I haven't changed," I corrected her. "I just stopped hiding." The first class was strange. I could feel everyone staring at me. But instead of shrinking into my chair as I would have done before, I sat up straight with my head held high. I was wearing a slightly more revealing blouse than usual, a slightly shorter skirt, and I felt amazing. Diego was sitting a few rows behind me, and I could feel his gaze on my back. But I didn't turn around even once. He no longer existed for me. At recess, Marcos approached me. "Hi," he said, smiling. "Hi," I replied, smiling back. "How are you handling all this attention?" "Fine," I said. "I'm actually enjoying it." Marcos laughed. "You deserve it." Saturday was, wow, it was liberating, I admitted. We were talking when Diego showed up. He looked terrible, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a defeated expression I'd never seen on him before. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," I replied without much enthusiasm. Marcos tensed beside me, clearly ready to defend me if necessary. "I just wanted to, talk to you," Diego said. "We already talked," I replied. "Saturday night." "I know, but..." "Diego," I interrupted. "We have nothing more to talk about. You made your decisions, I made mine." "But I haven't yet," I said firmly. "Stop, you're just humiliating yourself." Diego looked at Marcos, then at me, and finally understood that he no longer had a place in my life. "Okay," he said quietly. "Sorry to bother you." He walked away and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction. Diego simply no longer evoked any emotion in me. "You're amazing," Marco said. "The way you handled that is the way I should have handled it a long time ago." "Thank you," I replied. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster. I received messages from guys who had never paid any attention to me before. I was invited to parties I'd never been invited to before, and I felt a level of attention I'd never experienced. The first weekend after the party, I went to a nightclub with Sofia's older friends. It was a place I never would have had the courage to go before, but now I felt confident enough to go anywhere. I wore a super tight, short black dress, high heels, and my makeup was more dramatic. When I saw myself in the mirror before leaving, I barely recognized the girl reflected there. It was as if I had become a completely different person. At the club, I danced like I'd never danced before. I drank more than I should have and flirted with several older men. This power of seduction I had discovered was an addictive feeling. One guy in particular caught my eye. He must have been about 25 years old. Tall, dark-haired, with that mysterious air that drew me in. He watched me all night, and when he finally approached, my heart raced. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked in a husky voice that made me tremble. "Can you?" I replied, smiling provocatively. "What's your name?" "It depends," I said, moving closer to him. "Why do you want to know?" He smiled. "Why do I want to know what to scream? When or what?" I asked, playing dumb. "When you drive me crazy," he finished. It was an obvious pickup line, but it worked. I spent the rest of the night dancing with him, letting his hands explore my body over my clothes, feeling his breath on my neck. "Come with me," he whispered in my ear at one point. "Where to?" "My apartment is nearby." For a moment, I considered the possibility. It would be the boldest thing I'd ever done. But something inside me said it wasn't the right time yet. Not today, I replied. But maybe another time. He seemed disappointed, but respected my decision. Can I have your number? No, I said, smiling. But if it's destiny, we'll meet again. I left the club feeling powerful. I'd had an older man completely interested in me, and I'd been in enough control not to rush into anything. On the way home, I reflected on how my life had changed in just 1 week. The girl who had arrived at Sofia's party afraid of running into her ex was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. When I got home, my mother was waiting up for me. "How was your night?" he asked. "Amazing," I replied, and it was true. "You've been different lately," he observed. "Different, like more confident, more grown up." "Maybe it's because I've finally discovered who I am," I said. My mother smiled. "And who are you?" "Someone who no longer hides," I replied. "Someone who isn't afraid to be who they truly are." "I'm proud of you," she said. "I'm proud of myself too," I admitted, and it was true. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely proud of who I was. Not because someone else validated me, but because I had validated myself. At school on Monday, the transformation was complete. I was no longer Diego's ex-girlfriend. I was myself, and that was more than enough. Diego tried to approach me a few more times over the next few weeks, but I always maintained the same stance. Polite yet firm. He was no longer part of my life, and I had no interest in changing that. Marcos and I started getting to know each other better. He was kind, funny, and treated me the way I deserved to be treated. It wasn't love yet, but it was something good, something healthy. "You know, half the world is in love with you now, right?" he told me one day while we were having lunch together. "Half the world?" I asked, laughing. "Okay, half the boys in the school," he corrected. "And are you in love with me?" Marcos became serious for a moment. "Am I falling in love?" he admitted. "But I know you're still discovering yourself, so I'm in no rush." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Someone who respected me, who understood that I was in a process of transformation. "Thank you," I said, touching her hand. "Why?" "For giving me your time, for respecting me. It's the least you deserve." And at that moment, looking into her eyes, I knew I was on the right path. Not just in choosing partners, but in life in general. The insecure girl who hid behind baggy clothes and forced smiles had given way to a confident woman who knew her worth. And that, more than any revenge against Diego, was the greatest victory she could have achieved. A few weeks later, I learned that Diego was trying to win Carmen back, but she wanted nothing to do with him. Apparently, the humiliation of being dumped at a party by her ex had been too much for her. I felt sorry for him, but not enough to really care. Diego was the past, I was the present and the future. And the future had never seemed so bright. At graduation, months later, I was radiant. I wore a dress that accentuated every curve of my body. I was accompanied by Marcos and felt like I could conquer the world. Diego stood there alone, watching me from afar with an expression that mixed regret and admiration. But his gaze no longer affected me. He was just another face in the crowd. "Ready for college?" Marcos asked, inviting me to dance. "More than ready," I replied. "Ready for whatever comes." And as we danced, I thought about the neon green bikini that had changed my life. Not because it was provocative or sexy, but because it had given me the courage to be who I truly was. Sometimes all we need is a little push to discover our true power. Mine came in the form of a gag gift from my best friend, and I would never be the same again.